wanted to start this morning with just a brief moment out of honor and respect for the three heroes out of Bloomington, the first responders who lost their lives protecting the family of 7 children. As we meet today, their memorial service is taking place for Officer Elmstrand, Officer Rouge, and Paramedic Finseth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Welcome everybody to the virtual forum for Minnesota's Road to Volunteer Drivers. We are excited to have you all here. So just a couple housekeeping things. This is being recorded. It'll be posted to our MCOTA website. So just keep that in mind. We would love for you to ask questions throughout this. There's a couple ways to do it. First, you can use the chat feature. Just be mindful whether you're sending it to everyone. If you'd like to send a direct message to myself, Samantha McKinney, or to CJ, who's listed as the host, you can do that as well. And then we can read out loud any questions that you may have. You can also raise your hand and then we can call on people to ask your question and then we can provide a response. Today we will have 4 different presenters. I'll give them all a chance to introduce themselves as they go, but we've got Tom, Beverly, Colette, and Sherry who will all be interacting with us today. And then today on the agenda, we will be talking about what MCOTA is and who's involved with it, ongoing and upcoming MCOTA work team initiatives, and then the current and future legislation that is impacting transportation access. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today. This is a large number of continuing education and opportunities relative to the volunteer driver access and discussions that we have. Today's meeting is intended to kind of put it in more context of where these different forums and lunch and learns that we've been doing over the last few years relative to all the work we do, but specifically promoting volunteer drivers and the forums that we did and kicked off in 2021 and 2022. And to that end, next slide. We were talking about the Minnesota Council on Transportation Access, but the Minnesota Council on Transportation Access actually is a body that was put in place in 2010 according to statutes, and I'll show the next slide on that. But right now, here is one of the biggest partners that we have is the Regional Transportation Coordinating Councils, that's the RTCCs, and the Transportation Coordination Assistant Projects that are in the metro area. RTCCs are Greater Minnesota, and TCAPs are the metro, 7-county metropolitan area. Consists of stakeholders, members of the public, interested in improving mobility for those who have limited transportation options, such as older adults, people with disabilities, and individuals with low income, and veterans. And it's developed as an entity to implement priorities of human service transportation plans and a variety of other opportunities that have been coming up in various different areas of the state. Each RTCC and TCAP, there is a formalized coordination plan to engage with the work and of providers and service agencies. It goes back to that local coordination human service plan that was completed in 22 and 23, originated in 2017, the first go around, which actually identified RTCCs and TCAPs to come into existence and therefore have. So we have completed a portion of that work plan as some of the regions across the state have stepped into the RTCC world. Next slide. Back to the MCOTA and how we look at this is the Minnesota Council on Transportation supports transportation coordinations through 13 state agencies, is organizing members. These state agencies actually develop, have their own various different programs that support or are very dependent on transportation access. And this gives us an opportunity for addressing policy at the state level as well as legislation that may be getting in the way of or not allowing us to be as effective or as efficient as we move forward. The symbiotic relationship with the RTCCs and the TCAPs is, in some ways, I kind of like to refer to them as the wheels on the bus that actually hit the pavement and actually deal at the local level, where we have these different discussions as they play themselves out. And volunteer driver programs have been a real center point since before 2020, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. And of course, the founding legislation for the Minnesota Council on Transportation Access is in 2020 10 less session law of 174.285. And it basically, we are here to study, evaluate, oversee, make recommendations to improve coordination, availability, accessibility, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and safety of transportation services provided to the transit public. And you can get that off of our website. And next slide. Now, MCOTA stood up 4 different work teams over the years, and specifically recently, these are the work teams that we got in place. It was based on a strategic plan that was put in 2020 through 2024, which is a current year that we're working off of right now. And the creation of these work teams were to focus on these 4 areas, and it went through a workshop process with each state agency involved in that workshopping of what are our priorities that we're going to look at. That's where these priorities came from. And then in turn, each work team is giving focus. You can read these as we get into accessibility, the Olmsted work team, and then the removing barriers work team and the communications work team. But the one I'm going to focus a little bit right now, because it's basically why we're here today, is the Volunteer Driver Initiatives Work Team, focusing on strengthening volunteer driver programs, including and reducing legislative barriers and networking the professional development. We'll talk to you a little bit later about some of the successes we have and continuing struggles that we got in place. Next slide. So the Minnesota Council on Transportation Access Volunteer Driver Work Team. I believe I'm turning this over to Bev at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, and unless there's something you wanted to add to
You guys are brilliant and so much smarter than me. I'm going to let you take it away, Bev. Thank you very much.
All right. So hello, I'm Beverly Silot-Tolliver. I'm a co-lead for the Volunteer Driver Work Team. And I am a principal planner with the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission, and also coordinate the Arrowhead Regional Transportation Coordinating Council, one of those RTCCs mentioned earlier. And the main reason we wanted to have this particular forum was to provide a refresher on the tasks that we've done to date, which include quite a bit of resources that have some longevity and being very valuable to volunteer drivers in the state and also beyond too. And then also to look at forward of what we're working on now and hope to be working on in the near future. So next slide. This is the current listing of our volunteer driver team members, and includes a variety of industries that have a stakeholder in volunteer driving, and driving forward that mission mentioned before about providing networking opportunities, as well as looking at reducing barriers for legislation. You do not need to be a member of MNCOTA to also be a member on this work team. And correct me if I'm wrong with that, Tom, but we welcome anyone who has some input that would like to come to our meetings and have more, be nice to have more input from actual volunteer driver programs. We'll soon, after my presentation, we'll be introducing our new co-lead, Colette, from Arrowhead Transit, which also has a volunteer driver program. But otherwise, here is our current work team membership and staff from Minnesota Department of Transportation, and our new consultant staff from TKDA. So, I had one more point about that, but I forgot to mention it. So the other part of, we meet as a group, but then there's also an essentially maybe like subcommittee breakouts, where we have groups that developed the web series forum that took place a couple years ago, and these lunch and learns, and then also a group that do put together a research proposal that we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, next slide. So this is really, for a while, was the meat of what the volunteer driver work team was putting together, was a forum series during 2020 and 2021. And this was identified as opportunities and how we could support volunteer drivers during the pandemic. It was at one, or prior to this, there had been in-person forum that I remember having conversations. We were in the process of planning that in February, and then March 2020 came and we all went virtual. And this was how we could creatively still bring this information to the group and to volunteer driver services, and included a lot of brainstorming and planning and meetings to have this available. So this is on the website. And so these resources are theirs with the slide presentations, recordings, any other kinds of documents. It started out with policy and legislation, looking at the current state and future of volunteer drivers. We had Susan Sabatka come from the governor's office, and also then John Doan, who at the current time worked for Mobility for All, and look at policy issues and real life stories. And there is ongoing policy that we'll talk about later, but this was looking at the current policy about federal legislation that had been introduced, and then the state legislation that had been passed. Next was nuts and bolts of volunteer driver programs, how you can start a volunteer driver program and also promote said volunteer driver program. These are two separate webinars where quite a bit of information came from the speakers on recruitment and promotion. And then we had those that had just started a volunteer driver program, Jenny Rowland at the Boys Fort Transportation, and then also Will from AARP came, and that was something that comes up quite often, was how do we start a program? So this is one option to get some information there. Next slide. Next grouping was disabilities and diversity training. I need to flip my page. We were looking at person-centered practices for people with disabilities and etiquette for volunteer drivers, and also cultural and diversity and equity training, very in-depth conversation about trauma-informed care, and then also providing care and education about people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And this is one of the sections we're starting to get where this can be very valuable even beyond volunteer drivers themselves. And these speakers have quite a large knowledge base that can provide help for any really, I think, human service industry, including transportation or beyond that. And as I said, all these recordings are available on our website. Next slide. Getting back to more specifics to volunteer drivers, and also more sometimes of specific trainings that could be required for a person to become a volunteer. We had speakers from Easter Seals come and look at the safety and security. And there's also links to driving and training toolkits and safety toolkits. This one does have a lot looking at pandemic-based safety, but that is still a very important piece that could be needed again in the future. Looking at emergency preparedness, if this person's driving, I apologize for my teams coming up. You're driving and have any other type of emergency needed, that you might have some guidance being there. Passenger assistance and safety, incidents, accidents, working with vulnerable adults and people and disabilities that a volunteer might encounter. Next slide. This continued on. Again, this module was had quite a bit of information, looking at dealing with difficult customers and self-care. That tends to be a topic that comes up quite a bit, especially in the transportation sector. Ethics and boundaries, so looking at gifts that might come up, the HIPAA confidentiality, boundaries with clients, how to help your volunteers navigate that, and also to help your agency navigate that type of issue that might come up. And then closing with best practices and summary, another recap of some volunteer recruitment, messaging options, how to keep volunteers on board, and what are some indicators and elements of success for a volunteer driver program. Next slide. From the next year moving forward, we thought to have a more informal format, which is what the kind of format we have here today. There would be more of an engagement type of series, such as we termed it now Lunch and Learn. This is backwards. We started on the bottom here with looking again more updates on the legislative changes, and then heard about the Hopscotch program. A lot of these topics here are more like the innovative type of work that's being done in the volunteer driver world, such as working with Lyft and waiver programs, innovative ways to attract volunteer drivers. I mean, that's going to come up all the time. And Ride Sheet, which was an open source, it's a low tech format for volunteer driver services to coordinate their rides and whatnot. And then another additional with scheduling software, we had a panel of volunteer driver programs introduce the scheduling softwares that they use and looking at the challenges and successes they've had with those. And then Elliot McFadden from MnDOT came and spoke about upcoming mobility as a service pilot that's being done that includes how volunteer drivers might fit into this technology, as far as having a one source where a person can schedule a ride, and that would then maybe include a volunteer driver option. So next slide. Moving on, some of the other resources we've been putting together, and they're available on our website. The RTCCs and TCAPs had put some resources as far as to help with volunteer driver recruitment. And this is on the website, and I would encourage you to contact your respective RTCC or TCAP, meaning even if if you see something that you'd like to have this for your volunteer driver program, and maybe it's not made by your RTCC. As far as I know, these are all customizable, and we'd be willing to help put your branding on this and have it look in a way that you would like it to look for your region. So this is just a couple examples. There's videos that are on there as well that could be put on social media to encourage volunteers. And I think there's also some maybe past news interviews supporting volunteer drivers and how important they are. So next slide. Next, looking at how our work team engages with legislation. When state legislation was passed defining volunteer drivers as volunteers, and then also the Minnesota State tax credit, we put together quite a bit of work working with the Department of Commerce, Department of Revenue, and the Minnesota Board of Aging. We have a brochure that's available that would be more for the public facing to help folks navigate these legislative updates. But then there's also on our website a one-pager that goes into more specific details that could be helpful for the agency as a whole. And this was putting in the plain language how these changes impact the volunteers. Next slide. So moving, I would say ahead, but it's actually, we're in the middle of it right now. What are of the approved work activities? So Minn-Kota looked at all the work teams activities and approved or denied, and we were approved to move ahead with continuing with these forums and webinars. Upcoming topics are to be determined, and then also continue on with the resources being provided on our website and developing resources as we have input coming in from volunteer driver programs of what their needs are. And then moving ahead, we're hoping to have a research initiative funded to look at update the healthcare benefits for volunteer drivers. So that is in the works. We had a team put together a proposal for this. Minn-Kota has approved such, and we are just now looking at funding and funding partners who can help bring that forward. So I think this is my last slide, and we're going to move into introducing our if there's any questions, let me know before I move ahead. Introducing our new co-lead, Colette Hansen. And we'll take a minute if there's any questions. I don't see any. So, okay, welcome, Colette.
Thank you, Beverly, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I know we all are busy. And I just want to introduce myself. I am Colette Hansen, and I am the Assistant Director of Admin for Arrowhead. You can go to the next slide. And this is just our mission at Arrowhead and our vision, but you can go to the next slide. And a little about me. I've worked for Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency for about 17 years. I started in 2007 as a Head Start teacher. And then in 2013, I thought, I want to try something different. There was a position open at Arrowhead Transit as a support, and I applied. And at that time, they said she's never going to stick around. She's got a bachelor's. And I came on board working for our volunteer driving program, and I worked up to the manager of our volunteer driving program. And then in 2021, I got promoted to the assistant director for our transit side. But I'm still heavily involved in our volunteer driving program because I'm very passionate about it. And so currently I am with the buses, and I'm also with the volunteer driver side. Next slide. And I was excited when Beverly approached me and asked me to join her as the co-lead for the volunteer driver work team. And I thought to myself, what a great opportunity to maintain and strengthen all volunteer driving programs and the benefits of it. I mean, I thought about it, and it's like the networking, being able to join and connect with others in the same field, to share ideas, to bounce ideas off of each other, and just to learn from other people's experience. And then that collaboration, that opportunity of being part of a group that is working on for the challenges of a volunteer driving program, and how to collaborate with other partners to make it work. And the support and resources. I mean, the participation of using other agencies' resources, their tools, the support networks, and just to help make our volunteer driving programs more effective and sustain them. And of course, the community involvement that goes along with our volunteer driving programs is being able to provide assistance to individuals that desperately need this, and the importance of our volunteer drivers out there. Next slide. So with that being said, I just want to thank everybody. I'm excited to be a part of this team. I'm excited where it's going to go and what we can do together as a goal. And ultimately, we're here because we all share this common interest of improving and sustaining our volunteer driving programs, and hopefully working and collaborating together to gain those goals. So once again, I thank everybody. I'm excited to be on board.
Thank you. Yep, just our next speaker, Sherry Munyon.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Colette. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to join you as well. My name is Sherry Munyon, and I represent the Minnesota Public Transit Association as their government liaison to the state and federal elected officials. And I just wanted to first, for those who aren't aware of the coalition itself, to let you know that the other co-chairs are listed here. There's 4 of us. And also to describe that this is an informal coalition. There are no dues to join. There's no political structure. There's no dedicated staff. The 4 coalition chairs work with those who are supporting volunteer driver efforts. And we have been successful on some local initiatives. Beverly mentioned the 2 bills that passed, and for the last 3 years, we have focused efforts now on the federal level. And the coalition itself is comprised of local governments, it's comprised of nonprofits, transit associations, and human service providers. So it's a very broad organization. Next slide. The Volunteer Driver Appreciation Act is where we have our efforts focused at the federal level. For those who aren't aware, in January, the mileage reimbursement rate increased for business drivers, but that is now at 67 cents, and it has still remained at 14 cents for volunteer drivers, which we know is unjust, and it's an impediment to retaining and recruiting volunteer drivers. We have had different authors on the bill over the last few years. Last year and this year, Congressman Stauber has been our chief author. He and Angie Craig jointly introduced this year's bill that would provide for the IRS increasing the volunteer driver mileage reimbursement to match the business reimbursement when that changes. That's House File 3032. And the next, the Senate bill is Senate File 3020. Both of those bills started out with just one or two authors. In the House now, we are up to almost 15 authors, I think, from different states. And we have 4 authors on the Senate bill. So this was a big year on the Senate bill. All of the Minnesota delegation has signed on to the House file, with the exception of Congressman Emmer, and his office just has a policy, since he's a whip in his caucus, not to sign on to appropriation bills. So it's not a lack of support of the issue that we are working on. We have about 10 different states who are represented by the authors of the bill. Our general goal this session, which we know will take until the next congressional session, is to force a hearing in the House and secure congressional budget cost estimate. We know we're getting serious when we do see a cost estimate, which has to be brought forward for any bill hearing, so they know what the budget impact is going to be. This isn't a fast task, nor is it an easy task. Everyone's aware of the difficulty of getting anything passed in Congress these days. We're hoping that they resolve the budget situation, and then we'll continue our concerted efforts with their colleagues nationwide. Next slide, please. I think one of the most impressive things that's happened over the last year is increasing the depth of support from across the nation. Obviously, we can't get a bill that impacts the entire nation and national budget with only Minnesota support. So we have been reaching out to organizations all over the U.S., and I have to give kudos where it's justly due to the Minnesota Council on Nonprofits. They have been outstanding in recruiting their counterparts in other states to join our effort. And we are hoping to continue that, to increase the number of organizations in other states who are supportive of our proposal. Next slide. For those of you who may not have already signed up as a supporter of the organization, we want to encourage you to do so. As I mentioned, there's no major commitment. We'll ask your support in contacting your local legislators or others that you know across other states. We have been given a mission by Congressman Stauber to work on members who serve on the House Ways and Means Committee. That's where this tax initiative must pass. He's particularly asked us to focus on the Midwest states. So Top priority states are Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas. And a specific ask is if you know of any organization, any colleagues in those states, we want to try to do two things. One, recruit them to join the coalition, add their name, and then also to ask them to contact their congressional and U.S. Senate members and ask them to become co-sponsors of the bill. Since the decisions are going to be made first at the House Ways and Means Committee, that's why we're targeting those member states, and particularly in the Midwest surrounding Minnesota. The other thing I would say is the member states that we're trying to focus on, in addition, are numerous. We have about 20 other states where we do have associations who have joined as a supporter of the bill, and now we're trying to get them to go to the next step of actually contacting their congressional members, and some of that has already started. We're also encouraging support of Department of Transportations. This seems to be a bigger hurdle. We are working with representatives in New Hampshire, and we've been told that while the Department of Transportation won't sign on as official supporter of the bill, they are willing to do some work behind the scenes. And so we will do what we can to support them in their efforts to secure their sponsors and votes for the bill. So now I'll take a minute and turn to a new state initiative. We as a coalition did not adopt a piece of legislation in Minnesota this year. However, Senator Jeff Howe, who was one of our lead proponents on the state legislation for the income tax subtraction and defining a volunteer driver for insurance purposes, he is introducing legislation in March. It's in the revisor's office right now, and they're behind, stuck on bills. But it's an interesting concept. In Iowa, this last session, a bill was passed there that applied only to volunteer firefighters. But because they use their vehicles for the better good of the community, they passed an initiative that allows the volunteer firefighters to get into the state discount system to purchase tires on the car. Senator Howe is going to introduce that bill here, but because of his interest in volunteer drivers, he's going to expand that to also include volunteer drivers. So how this would work, we don't have final language yet, but conceptually, if you are a volunteer driver for 3 years, you would be eligible to get your next set of 4 tires for your passenger vehicle or light duty truck at the same cost of the state procurement system. The way it works is your municipality or organization actually has to place the order with the state, but you have to make payment to your organization for the tires, and that would include labor and taxes. And then you will receive, the volunteer driver will receive a coupon, a certificate that the 4 tires are paid for. You can take that to the tire dealer of your choice to get your tires at that discounted rate. And the 3 years requirement, that's to make sure we don't get a volunteer who comes in, gets a set of tires, and then disappears. So it's for individuals who have been supporting their community and hopefully will continue doing so. This new initiative would be available to a volunteer driver every 3 years if they needed a new set of tire that often. So that's a quick update of where we are today. Again, I would encourage anybody who is not already a member of the coalition to please sign up. You receive notices of meetings. We will in the future be sending out a call to action to help contact colleagues that you may have across the nation. And for those of you who have not yet done so, we strongly encourage you to send a note thanking your congressional members. Isn't that nice? You don't have to ask. You get to send an email to your congressional members, thanking them and telling them how important this is to pass the increase in the volunteer mileage rate for your community. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
So yeah, if there's any questions for any of us, I know this was a little quicker of a lunch and learn and also a bit different, but we wanted to provide this refresher to the group on the resources that are available and some of the new things that are coming up. And so really use the website and any of the co-leads or contacting Tom if you have a request, like there's some resource that you wish was there, we can help either provide that or find you a link to getting that completed and also sharing that out to fellow volunteer driver programs.
I also want to thank everybody for joining us today. And again, as Bev said, that we are doing a refresher because we have done a lot of work over the last 2 to 3 years. And I think sometimes we need to do a little backwards reflection and say, my goodness, we did this and this and this, and all these resources are already available. Most of the resources that we're referencing do not age out. They have pertinence to you today as they did 2 years ago. So what we're doing is inviting you to continue to take a look at that, use those tools and that. We've also captured some levels of attention at the national level where we've actually got some people actually coming to our website and looking at the resources that we have available to us. That's an opportunity for us to even learn beyond what's going on in Minnesota with our other agencies across the state, across the nation as we move forward. Since we do have a few minutes here, I am going to open it up to the individuals that are here with us as we're looking. Thank you, Judy. Judy, you want to weigh in on that? If you want to go ahead and say that.
Sure. Let me just move my screen. There's a TCRP, a Transit Cooperative Research Program, RFP out on the streets. I think it's due any day now, that asks respondents to develop a handbook related to volunteer driver programs. And it's closely aligned with the work of the state of Washington that they're doing. So keep an eye out for any information that comes from that program. It hasn't been paneled yet. There's a panel set up, but it hasn't been awarded. So keep an eye out for that. And the other thing, Tom's part of a quarterly meeting that I have with DOTs and state folks that are doing coordination and mobility management and CCAM. And so if there's anything that you want me to disseminate in those forums, it's with FTA regions 1 and 5. And I know you're interested in FTA Region 5. And so if there's anything you want me to disseminate, then I'm happy to. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Judy Shanley, and I work at the National Office of Easter Seals and also am the Easter Seals Director of the National Center for Mobility Management. So thanks, Tom.
Bet, Judy. And also I just let everybody know too, Judy is working with us relative to CCAM. CCAM is basically the federal version of MCOTA. Or maybe you want to say MCOTA is a state version of CCAM. It's a symbiotic relationship, but the beauty of that is CCAM is working with the federal agencies, and we frequently hear the question that says, well, the feds won't let us do that. Well, the reality is that's not necessarily true. So we can check those realities because we're in communication with the federal level agencies that are involved with this. As I'm working with the other state agencies here in Minnesota, I've heard that same statement. The feds won't let us do that. And Judy has been instrumental for redirecting that thinking on a couple occasions. Also, Easter Seals and Judy and Steve Workman, which if you have attended a few of our MCOTA meetings, you will recognize that name as well as Judy's name, are working with us at MCOTA level conversations with trying to get a refocus, generation of where we're going. We have a work plan that I've been working on since 2020, and it ends in 2024. And our intention is to take another strategic direction or focus, depends on how to do it. The work areas that you saw earlier were the missions and things that they're all working on. We are working on at MCOTA with a great deal of involvement with you, the stakeholders, and specifically our RTCCs and TCAPs, that you are actually staffing that. To answer Bev's question about, can you be a part of it? You don't have to be a member of MCOTA. Absolutely, positively. If you bring some expertise and primarily some interest in what you need us to focus in on, please join any of those work teams as you see fit. You can just contact me and we can get you squared away associated with that. But this is focused primarily on the work that we've been doing with the volunteer driver program. And Sherry's done a great job, and actually Bev is a co-chair of the coalition, the Minnesota Volunteer Driver Coalition, which I think maybe they might drop the Minnesota because we got a lot of national people attached to the conversation as well, the coalition. And I think we have some energy and synergy getting there, and that legislation that happened at the state level is now being emulated at the federal level, and the coalition has done an excellent job of building the coalition and bringing people along in that kind of conversation. So we encourage you to do that. We're down to about the last 15 minutes of this meeting. I am going to open it up to any of the participants who have an area that you would like us to pay attention to focus in on. Bev made reference to the study that's going to basically look at what is the positive influence that volunteer driver programs have on health outcomes. So obviously we'll be working with ideally our partners at DHS and our partners with the Department of Health and other partners across the state as we move forward. MCOTA already approved the work plan for that study to be done. However, we have not identified the funding source that's going to be associated with how to pay for it. It's roughly a $60,000 to $80,000 projected cost for that study. That said, we're in the process of working on that very thing. So for our last few minutes here, I'd like to open the floor up to anybody who says, have you thought about maybe we should look at this? This is your opportunity to give us some feedback directly. And if anybody's ever been in a meeting with me before, they know I'm not bashful about calling out people. Hey, Ted Nelson, are you want to chime in there? Or is there something you'd like us to pay attention?
I guess the one thing that I just want to say is, thank you guys for all the effort and work that you've done on this. Especially Sherry for championing this and getting the legislators to understand the need for this and really just kind of pushing it forward. So I think this is a great work team. I think they're doing amazing work, and I'm glad to be a part of the volunteer coalition as well. So I think things are going in the right direction. I'm excited to see the future of getting more volunteers. So
thank you, Ted. Appreciate that. Is that Lori Schultz that I know?
It is.
How you doing, Lori? Haven't talked to you in a bit.
I'm good. So I'm sorry, I'm just getting on late to the Lunch and Learn. New role at the Minnesota Community Action Partnership, or the association that supports all of the community action agencies in the state. And as Some of them have excellent public transit and volunteer driver programs. I don't know that I have anything new to report other than, you know, the community action agencies are just doing what they do best, providing services to people.
Well, Lori, thank you for joining us. And of course, MnDOT has had a long-standing relationship with Community Actions. They have been an excellent resource for building our multi-county public transit systems and actually in community-based services. They've done both. And Lori came from TCAP not too long ago and has a long history of working both with the public transit as well as a rather robust, becoming more robust, by the way, good news, Lori, robust volunteer driver program that they got going on there. So thank you for joining us. We're interested in how the CAP agencies are a key stakeholder. Actually, I would say partner is maybe a stronger term, partner in the relationships of how we build this structure and organizational structures that are going to be necessary for us to get program delivery. We talk about the theoretical ideas of how we're going to do this, but we still have to get into the pragmatics of how to operationalize this. And again, all these forums that we've done and Lunch and Learns is intended to help and facilitate and to inform people about how to operationalize these issues, these concerns, these problems, and in turn come up with some, you know, innovative ways to address those. So again, Lauren, thank you for joining us today.
Tom, we have a question in the chat from Kim Armstrong. Is there anyone who knows of any grant writers or grants to help an agency to apply to help to sustain a volunteer driver program in the South Metro? Thanks.
What we're going to suggest you do is work with, if you're in the South Metro, meaning Dakota or whatever part of South Metro you happen to be in, why don't you reach out to me and I can get you connected with the TCAPs that are in the metro area and get you lined up. One of the things that they do assist on, not necessarily they don't write the grant for you, but they certainly would bring in some various resources to help you along. So to that end, I'll if you want to contact me offline to send me an email real quick, tell me where you are, I'll get you connected with the TCAP in the Twin Cities metro area, because we do have all 7 counties currently now covered. So hopefully that answered that question. Thank you. Good question. Many of our RTCCs and TCAPs, for that matter, have applied or been part of a partnership relationship to apply for a variety of different fund sources and a capability. AmeriCorps Seniors is something that Judy's putting in there, and I'm aware that they are pretty actively involved in a good funding source. AARP is another one that's doing it. Actually, there's even AAA dollars, area on aging dollars that may be available, which some of you are already attached to in some way or another. There's a whole host of different variety of funding sources. Why Judy is a wealth of this information, because she is attached to CCAM, and that is the federal agencies that do have some federal funds attached to this program as well, potentially attached to these programs as well. And again, our entryway for you to get that information more is go through your RTCC mobility manager or go through your TCAP mobility manager in your respective area. And those of you who are joining us that don't currently have an RTCC available to us, please reach out to me and we can see what you can do, because as you can tell, Judy is a wealth of information. So we could tap into Judy a little bit there. Any other questions, comments? Gee, why don't you focus on that type of thing? We're down to our about last 10 minutes.
Hey, Tom, it's Judy. Can I ask a question of the group?
Please do.
Would that be okay? So in our CCAM work with MCOTA, we've done a series of discussions with some state CCAM leaders. And the thing I learned about in Minnesota is your community hubs and also your initiatives around employment first. It's called Minnesota One or E1 Minnesota. Do any of you have engagement and involvement in either the community hub or the employment first initiatives? Because it seems to me those two entities are a collaborative of various grantees, various professionals associated with all these different state agencies. And I wondered if you're involved in any of them.
I'm going to pick on Karen. Karen, have you had any contact in your 7E?
No, I have not. I'd be interested in learning more about that, though.
This is something that Judy was bringing to my attention of, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, whatever you did, Judy, recently. And in the conversations with our own members at MCOTA, where they came back, oh, we're kind of working with this, which is something that we've consistently always been asking the various different members, what opportunities, what situations, what program areas that you might be interested in paying attention to. And that's the reason why we wanted to codify this more officially. And that's what Judy and Steve are helping us do with our own membership. Judy brought this to my attention, and I'd be honest with you, I was not totally aware of it, but I was thinking the RDC, since regional development commissions, might have been attached to those conversations. So we've got a couple of people that are attached to RDCs in this phone call. So just kind of bear that in mind.
Okay.
We can probably try to investigate that deeper.
Yeah, and any information you would, if you wouldn't mind sending my direction. Also, Michelle Thomas, I don't know if she's on the call or not, but she's more involved in other things other than transportation, but more parts of economic development and such in our RDC. She might know of this, but you know, I would be interested in sharing that information with my executive director and with Michelle if there would be something you could send off my direction, please.
I think
Certainly.
we'll send that, Judy, to all the RTCCs and TCAPs, because it's across the board, and it's something we could probably we might even dedicate an hour, our own lunch and learn meeting. And so we could probably get into that a little bit more. Hey, Tiffany Collins, you represent a managed care organization that is doing transportation. Where are you guys at with Prime West and this discussion about how we want to be looking at helping volunteers driver programs? And I know you're already working with some of the people that are already in this room right now.
Hi there. Basically, we're just there to really support the volunteer driver programs. I'm excited to see all of the work that is continued on the volunteer driver programs, especially the legislation and things like that. But really just trying to support so that that members of insurance programs and the communities and things like that can still move around and things like that. So we're just kind of trying to stay in the loop of what is kind of going on, and it's great to be involved in seeing what's going on again. So
And
Hainsworth, your hand is up. Sorry to interrupt, Tom. I want to make sure we get his comment in.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Alan Anderson. I'm with the ARP Driver Safety Program. And I just have a general question, not specific to volunteer drivers, but just access to other means of transport, right? One of the things that we teach at the end of the latter part of our classes is how to find alternative means of transport. And we started a few years back thinking about, was there a single point of contact for doing this? I know Arrowhead has a program where you can go in and order a ride and whatever. I just wondered how close we are or where we are in terms of actually, for the end user, how do they access these programs, including the volunteer driver program?
Thank you, Alan, for that question. Right now, most of the RTCCs across the state are looking at some variations of what we affectionately refer to as a one call, one click combination. The generic term across the nation is called, and Gary Ludwig, don't yell at me, called a TMCC, which is a Transportation Management Coordination Center. That's a generic industry term, meaning that, again, it's a one call, one click, where people call in and say, hey, I have this transportation need. I need to move from point to A to point B, and whatever it happens to be, whether you're a senior, disabled, whatever your issue that is making your transportation not capable for you just to hop in your own car and go wherever you want to go. And we've got a lot of portion of the population that are at various different times, not maybe 100% of the time, that fall into that category frequently.
Sure.
So a lot of the RTCCs across the state right now are looking at that. They themselves can operate minorly at that level and try to help connect dots, because one of their functions is to know who all the different providers are in their geographical area, and then the various different service levels those providers do. However, on that, they are not structured to deal with 60 phone calls a day. Okay.
Right.
If it's 1 or 2 phone calls a day, that's probably about as much as they can handle, because they're working about trying to organize the various different stakeholders and partners to pull together potentially to build a one call, one click in their geographical area. I think the group has long since said that there isn't going to be a single 1-800 number for the state of Minnesota to get people to point A. I think it's been discussed anywhere from 3 on the minimum size and 6 maybe up to different areas to eventually cover the whole state. But there is the governance associated with that, the funding, always the funding issue, who's going to do it, the liability conversations, all that is having to be a conversation that we can take a look at. So there is an opportunity for us to be looking at that and stepping into that space. Alan, I wish I could say you're the first person to ever ask me that question.
Sure.
But I'm going to tell you right now, you are, I think, somewhere about 102. And it's kind of like, and what have you done lately, Tom, to solve that problem? The answer is how to solve that problem really lies with a number of the people that are sitting in this room right now.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
and to date, just so you're aware of what is currently out there. I don't know what region you are in, Alan. You mentioned Arrowhead, but each of the RTCCs have a directory type, whether it's our website, paper directories, the transportation finder tool. So there is something developed on a real basic level already. And so if you need, I don't know what region you are in, but
Yeah, I basically am a deputy state coordinator, so I cover the whole of Minnesota.
okay.
And I also write a newsletter to all our instructors, and this is the question that comes up, quite often, as Tom mentioned, right? How do we access all these? Is there some simple way of doing it, like an Uber or a Lyft or whatever? So we've continually tried to put something together, to at least tell our instructors, okay, here are places to go, and I mentioned Arrowhead because that seemed to be one of the more advanced ones where there's more of a one call, one click, whatever situation. But I'm actually in Hennepin County in Bloomington, so.
Yeah, I would say one thing is looking at like on the Makota website has a breakdown of each of the RTCCs and then our websites, and then our directories are on those websites. So that could be an option you could provide those instructors with.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Anything to give us some access, that'd be great.
Great. Alan,
thanks.
Feel free to send me an email. I'll get you connected to all those things off the website right here, what you got right there on the screen. Is also an opportunity. We'll be sending out this PowerPoint to everybody that has attended today's meeting. So hopefully we can continue this conversation. Very good conversation. Appreciate it. Great team. Thank you very much for all you've done and pulling this together. again, this is kind of a kickoff for another element of our lunch and learns as we move forward. So some of the stuff that you have told us today you'll be seeing it come back at you in another lunch and learn at some point in time. So please join us again as we get this set up for the balance of this year. So thank you all for attending. Greatly appreciate it.
Mhm.